board. So our main topics today are stalking in general, overview of stalking on college campuses, Title IX, and safety planning. So even though we have a really small group, I do have some polls just to kind of get an idea of who is attending and what your stalking work looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and launch those polls if folks want to respond. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone who responded. And so this is helpful. Great. Okay. So what is stalking? Stalking in North Carolina is defined in the North Carolina statute in 4 parts. So the first part is course of conduct. So it has to be 2 or more acts, including but not limited to acts in which the stalker directly, indirectly, or through third parties by any action, method, device, or means is in the presence of or follows, monitors, observes, surveils, threatens, or communicates to or about a person or interferes with a person's property. Harass or harassment, knowing conduct, including written or printed communication or transmission, telephone, cellular, or other wireless telephonic communication, fax, pager messengers, you can tell this is kind of old, or transmissions, answering machine or voicemail messages or transmissions, email, directed at or at a specific person that torments, terrorizes, or terrifies that person and that serves no legitimate purpose. A reasonable person in the victim's circumstances, and substantial emotional distress, significant mental suffering or distress that may but does not necessarily require medical or other professional treatment or counseling. And so that's the piece that is super tough with stalking cases, because how does one really prove that they're in emotional distress? And everyone kind of responds to stalking differently. So I know that's where we run into a lot of issues when it comes to reporting. And I don't know if Sky has anything to add there.
I do. So our stalking statute in North Carolina can be used, and that could be a criminal act. This is a criminal act. However, I should note here that this particular stalking statute has been struck down as unconstitutional because it is too broad. However, we have not changed the stalking statute as of right now because there isn't a way to adequately address what the case law is called Shackelford. And what the court said in that case, it was a very unsettling case where a party met another party at church, and he decided that he was going to be with her. And he had only seen her at church, so he didn't show up or stalk her online, but he did send her gifts, and he would send her things and send her notes. So what was interesting about this case is that they said because there was no actual conduct that happened, that it shouldn't have put her in that substantial emotional distress, and that this as written was too broad because it does cover those acts because it's indirect here through third parties by action. And he called her work. I think this case law is a few years old, so I might be a little rusty on it. He did call her work and leave her voicemails there. So it very clearly fell underneath our stalking statute here. But what the court said was that this was too indirect because it could be used for people who are just sending gifts to another person or something like that. However, changing it and making it more narrow would create some issues for folks who are being stalked. So we have not dealt with that at this point. And I haven't seen another case that has been on point to say, oh, this is narrow enough, but not too broad. So I do think that in the coming years, we probably will kind of tinker around with this language to address what the court said.
Awesome. Thank you, Sky. So to Sky's point, stalking can show up in a lot of different ways, and sometimes those ways may not seem super obvious to other people that it is stalking. Because it's not always being followed by the stalker. It can be incessant calling, messaging, emailing, or of course, now in the age of social media commenting, like direct messaging, things like that. It can show up as gifts that are left at the victim's house or on their car with no note or a nondescript note. And it's typically a gift that has some kind of symbolic meaning to the stalker and the person experiencing the stalking. With the advent of tracking devices such as AirTags or even the Find My network through Apple, discreetly tracking someone has become much easier, and it may not require the stalker to actually be in the place with the victim. And along those same lines, there are other ways of surveillance stalkers may use via technology, such as hacking into their computer network, their email accounts, their bank accounts, especially if it's, a former partner or roommate or someone that's close to the person being stalked. That person may know a lot of personal information about them. Property damage can sometimes be used as a tactic to let the victim know that they were there, or to kind of scare them and say, hey, it's really easy for me to access you. They may break into your car, do vandalism, such as slashing your tires, breaking into your residence hall or your apartment. And some stalkers will threaten to harm friends, family, or pets as a way to get the victim to talk to them or intimidate them. On campus, the stalker may know what the object of their obsession's class schedule is and sign up for all the same classes, or create a schedule that allows their paths to cross frequently. And especially if it's a small campus, it's probably not very difficult for that to happen. Social media, obviously, is also a route a lot of stalkers take, especially in the college age population. They may create fake accounts to connect with the victim, or even create accounts with the victim's name and make posts that would hurt their reputation or embarrass them in some way. And finally, they may have access to private images, such as naked photos, and share those without the victim's consent. And this may especially be true if the stalker is a former intimate partner and the images were shared with them consensually when they were together, but now to get back at them or to show that they have power and control over them, they may share them non-consensually with others, or post them online, anything of that nature. So again, talking about stalking and technology, when we're working with the campus population, it's important to just have a good foundational knowledge on technology and the way it can be used. So in a research study, 24% of college stalking victims, sorry, my cat's here, 24% of college stalking victims have had a stalker create a fake profile pretending to be the victim. 21% have experienced spoofing, or a stalker making a call, text, email that makes it seem like it's coming from someone else. 16% have been doxxed, or sharing private or identifying information online. So like the stalker, I've heard of situations where they'll post the person's address on social media and be like, go to them. 16% have had their private images shared non-consensually. So I encourage advocates to stay up to date on social media platforms so you can be a little more equipped when students come to you with issues related, and can incorporate these into your prevention planning as well. So 18 to 24-year-olds experience the highest rates of stalking among adults. And the most common statistics we see are between 6% and 39% of college students report being stalked since entering college. The students most vulnerable to stalking experiences are the students we know to be the most vulnerable to sexual violence as well as other forms of violence. And for the same reasons, people feel like they may be less likely to report, they're more easily accessible, institutional oppression, things like that. So we see here students at higher risk of experiencing stalking include women, students of color, sexual minority and gender nonconforming students, students with disabilities, students living off campus, and younger students. Some people enter college at 17 if they, finish high school early. And so they're definitely may be seen as a vulnerable target. Stalking and sexual assault. Among undergraduate students stalked by an intimate partner, 32% were sexually assaulted the prior academic year. So we know there's a lot of overlap. And then similarly to sexual violence, Many people who may experience stalking do not necessarily label it that way. 43% of college stalking victims who meet the legal criteria of stalking um, won't call it that. Also similar to sexual violence, most victims of stalking are stalked by someone they know. Most stalkers are students, and 33% are former intimate partners. Okay, so now that we have covered some stalking on campus statistics and general knowledge, we can talk about the potential impact of stalking on students. Students who are being stalked may start missing or dropping classes. This could be because their stalker is in that class, or they know they'll run into them on their way there, or because it's hard to concentrate in class. They're having anxiety about running into the stalker, which is preventing them from wanting to leave their home. Students may have difficulty concentrating in other areas as well, such as extracurriculars, or if they're a student athlete, they may be underperforming because they're distracted or stop engaging in events altogether. If the stalker is someone who, is in their friend group, they may experience social isolation and not want to go out with their peers. Even if they're not socially connected, they may not want to go out because they're afraid they're going to see their stalker. And so this can feel really isolating and have students who are experiencing stalking losing access to some of their social support. Additionally, students who live on or off campus may have to relocate due to the stalking, which of course is very stressful. And finally, students who are experiencing stalking may ultimately decide to transfer schools or drop out altogether due to the stress and needing to focus on themselves. Any questions so far before we start talking about Title IX? Okay.
All right. Go
Anytime.
ahead, Leah.
Oh, I was just going to say, feel free to put your questions in the chat anytime, or you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about how stalking intersects with Title IX itself. And as if you've been in any of my Title IX webinars, you know that there was a 2020 Title IX rule that came out and became active on August 15th, 2020. So we're about a year and a half into that new rule. And it is the first rule in history that codifies stalking as an act that's covered by Title IX. So it didn't only include intimate partner violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, but it specifically named stalking as something that's covered under that Title IX, that colleges have to respond if there is stalking and they are aware of it. And in that final rule, it does say that colleges must provide supportive measures to a victim of stalking. And what does a supportive measure mean? That has changed a little bit in the new Title IX regulations. And in these new regs, it means any individualized services that are reasonably available and they are non-punitive, non-disciplinary, and not unreasonably burdensome to the other party, while designed to ensure equal educational access, protect safety, or deter sexual harassment. So what does that mean exactly? Previously, there were not those words in there in the previous Title IX regs, the non-punitive, non-disciplinary, unreasonably burdensome. So it's saying during that process, if a student decides to file a formal complaint under Title IX and the process has begun, you're in that investigation period, during that time, the school must provide those supportive measures to you. And that looks like a lot of different things. It could be changing classes, changing dorms, whatever that may be that doesn't discipline the other student. So you can't just immediately take the other student off of campus without their due process, full hearing sort of investigatory period. However, you can provide those services such as counseling or just ensuring that that victim feels safe and that they have that educational access that the other person has. So that again is under the new rules, the supportive measures, the school has to do that immediately. So what is stalking? It's a little bit different than the North Carolina specific stalking statute. I'm not going to read this entire thing to you, but it includes that reasonable fear provision that also is similar to the North Carolina statute. If you think back a few slides ago, that North Carolina statute is severe emotional distress, but here it is reasonable fear of death or serious bodily injury. And then it also includes that substantial emotional distress as well. So it has that first segment, and then the second segment is that substantial emotional distress. So similar, but not the same as the North Carolina specific statute, but this is under the Clery Act, and the Clery Act has been in law for about three decades now. So this is not new, this particular statute, but it is newly covered by Title IX. So a question that I get a lot as someone who works with survivors on college campuses is whether they have to file a Title IX complaint for protection. The answer is no. There are some other options, and obviously it's the same concerns that your student may have about Title IX versus a criminal process or a civil process even, and kind of those different lanes that the student could choose to go down if they wanted to pursue a legal avenue. However, the school can also provide counseling or just put a no contact order in place for both parties just to take care of that if the student doesn't want to follow through with a formal Title IX complaint. So those are all options. And like Leah covered earlier, we do have that state law, and that is a criminal act under state law. So they could file criminal charges against the other person. You do have your campus resources. I know we have some folks on today who are from campus communities where they provide those resources and support for students. And there's also social media reporting. So it's a no-brainer that in the last couple of years, stalking has increased while we have been in COVID times, and it is easier, and we spend more time on our computers, on our cell phones than we did 2 years ago. And so as far as Title IX, different actions have happened in the last 2 years. Stalking up there, cyberbullying up there. Those have risen under the last couple of years because all classes were on online for a while, and now there's a mixture. Some classes are back online. So because of that, it has made it easier for folks to stalk other folks if that is their goal. So if you wanted to do online reporting for stalking or non-consensual images, there are reporting links for all of your major platforms. So if there is someone being stalked, one way to help your student, maybe if a student doesn't want to file a Title IX complaint, but they do want to ensure their safety on a social media platform, number one easiest way is to make that complaint to the platform itself. That is not a foolproof method, as I'm sure most people know that it may or may not be followed up on, but one way to take an immediate step for that student to ensure their safety is to report directly to the platform, especially if it's a non-consensual image. They will take those down. But as far as stalking goes or being doxxed, those things should be taken down as well. But stalking can be harder as far as reporting that to the platform, but I always suggest that as an initial step to just see if you can get it offline immediately. Are there any questions about the Title IX process for stalking specifically? I'm happy to talk through the Title IX investigatory process, but I assume that folks probably are familiar, but if you're not, that's totally fine. I'm happy to talk about it. All right, I'll turn it back over to Leah.
Awesome. Thanks, Guy. And we'll have time at the end for questions. And it's a really small group today. So we will probably have ample time at the end if y'all want to talk about anything else related, or any questions pop up. So seeking support on campus. Like Sky mentioned, Title IX may be a good option for some students, but others might not want to go through that process, but they can still get support. In a study of those who contact a campus program for help, 40% say it was extremely or very useful, and 35% said it was a little or not at all useful. So about 50-50. But I know that people often just appreciate knowing that they're not alone and that they do have some support. So since we do have some folks on the call, if you're here from campus, what kind of support outside of Title IX does your university offer? If people are typing, we can come back to it. But I imagine some people are probably offering safety planning. They may be offering advocacy and support. They may be helping a student feel empowered to maybe tell other people that can kind of have their back about the incident, about the stalking. So whether you are on a campus or not, if you're working with a student who's experiencing stalking, you'll want to be prepared to help them with their safety plan. And safety planning for stalking in a lot of ways looks very similar to safety planning for sexual violence or other forms of IPV, but there are some things those who are experiencing stalking may want to pay closer attention to. Next slide. So this slide has a lot of words on it, but I'll just kind of go through it pretty quickly. There are different parts to a safety plan. So the physical piece, which is probably what we're all most familiar with, are things someone who's being stalked might want to do to help keep them physically safe. So that could be changing up their routine. If they typically take the same route to class or work every day, they could try using a different path to get there. So it's harder for the stalker to predict where they'll be. I believe most campuses, you can request a campus escort. Of course, that might not make everyone feel safe. So it's not a strategy for everyone, but I know at least on the campus that I went to, if I needed a campus escort back to my residence hall or to my class, especially at night, campus security would be willing to do that. When parking, try to park as close to the building as possible. This means less of a walk until you're inside, probably with other people, or where you can lock the door. If it feels like you can, telling some trusted friends or professors what's going on may be helpful. Friends might be willing to escort you to class or back to your hall. You can walk in groups, and they'll be more aware not to just give information about you out. So especially if it's a mutual friend, they may not think twice if that person's like, oh, I haven't heard from Kelsey in a while. What's she been up to? What are you guys doing this weekend? And if they know that that person is like exhibiting stalking behaviors, they can just be like, I don't know. Professors may also be able to have your back and not share information with your stalker about what your class schedule is, and may be willing to provide some grace with late assignments or if it seems like you're not paying attention in class. So I know that that's also something that campuses can offer, whether that's a Title IX, like accommodation after a report has been made or not. You may be able to work with the professors on your campus to get extensions and things like that. Some RAs and RDs are not confidential employees, so you'll want to check on that before you make a decision. But if you are comfortable and you know what to expect, you might be able to let your RA or RD know so that they can keep a lookout for the person hanging around. Or if they see them trying to break into your room or anything of that nature, they can just kind of have an idea of what's going on. If you live off campus and the stalker is your roommate or partner, you may be able to change your locks. You can review NC's landlord-tenant laws. And then you can also file a 50B or a 50C. So if anyone has questions about that process, feel free to ask those as well. And then tech safety planning has definitely become a lot more important, especially in the 18 to 24 age range. and a lot of stalkers are utilizing cyber tactics. So first and foremost, turn the location off on all of your accounts. Don't share your location. If you have any location sharing apps such as Google Maps, Life 360, or Find My, which all iPhones come with, check the settings. If you feel like it would make you feel safer to share your location with friends and family, there are options to only share your location with certain people, but still, thinking about stalkers kind of being able to hack devices, it could still be risky, but that is an option to be picky about who you share your location with. And make sure it's off on all of your devices with GPS watches, computers, all of the technology that we're connected to. Just make sure you're checking each device. It may be a good idea to take a social media pause until the stalker no longer feels like a threat. Posting anything on social media may make the stalker feel like you're talking to them or inviting them into your life. It also provides opportunities for them to know where you are and who you're with. And it's also okay to ask your friends and family not to post about you on social media. If your friends are all taking a picture for social media, you can opt out or ask your friends to get your permission before posting anything about you. Check your bags, pockets, cards, etc. for tracking devices. We're doing a webinar later this month on non-consensual tracking devices, and we'll dive deeper into this. But a lot of you may already be familiar with AirTags and the way they're being misused to track people without their knowledge. And I think we're going to continue to see a rise in this. So talk with students about what they are and how to check for them. Some stalkers, especially in the younger age range, are very tech savvy and may even know how to hack devices. So talk with the person being stalked about changing passwords. And if they're worried their device is being monitored, they can maybe look for resources and support on someone else's device or a public computer like at the library, especially if they're worried that the person is able to access their phone and they don't necessarily want to raise any red flags. And then finally, with emotional safety planning, people who experience stalking, whether it's in the context of IPV or a standalone stalking experience, they're often impacted by similar emotions and experiences of those who experience sexual violence or other forms of IPV. They may feel anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, a loss of control. And as we talked about earlier, this can impact their campus experience and make it hard to focus or feel like getting out of bed in the morning. Some things advocates can do to help victims cope with these responses are practice grounding activities. So if they're having difficulty staying present, giving them some grounding tools and practicing mindfulness. For stalking victims, they sometimes have to change their whole routine to avoid the stalker. Help them find new routines that feel safe. And even after the stalking has ceased, they may still feel uncomfortable engaging in things they used to enjoy. Help them find new things to try or reintegrate some of those routines back into their lives safely and give time for processing that experience. Help empower them to ask for what they need from friends and family or professors. This could look like helping them make a list of what they need, practicing asking for it, or practicing saying no. This may come up a lot if the stalker is in the same friend group and they've been invited out. For students, it can be so hard to say no, even when they want to, or it doesn't feel safe because they're worried that their peers are gonna get upset with them. And friend acceptance is like the most important thing when you're younger. And so saying no may make them feel more isolated. And then finally, validate and help them work through this. Offer to accompany them when it's appropriate to be supportive. They may ask for a meeting with their professor about an extension on an assignment and just want you to wait outside. Many campus counseling centers have a maximum of how many times a student can come in for counseling before they're referred to an off-campus long-term counselor. So you may want to work with the counseling center and the victim to help them find someone who would be a good fit. Okay, and then also with safety planning, documentation with stalking is super, super important, especially if they do plan to report. So if you're working with someone, make sure that they're keeping a record of everything. There are printable forms available online that you can give to students for this purpose, and they're available in the stalking toolkit that Sky and I worked on, and we can share links with that. But Make sure that they keep a record of every text, email, DM, social media post. They can take screenshots, print those out, and keep them in a folder. It may be intuitive for the victim to change their number or block the stalker, but it actually might be beneficial to keep their number only to track correspondence from the stalker and then get another phone that the stalker doesn't know about and only share that with people you can trust. The victim doesn't have to use that phone or respond to the stalker. But again, if you do plan on reporting, it can be used as evidence of a pattern of harassment. Document all instances of the stalker showing up at your location. Include where, when, what time, who else was there, what happened. I've heard from many stalking victims that they'll call the authorities to report a stalking incident, but it's not enough for them to arrest the person. And then they call again and the police say they don't find a file or previous incident number. And so if a stalking victim does make a police report, make sure they ask for the incident number and document that as well in case it needs to be looked up later. And since a big part of the stalking definition is that it makes a reasonable person feel substantial emotional stress, it may also benefit the victim to record how they were feeling at the time of the incident and how and why that incident made them feel fear or unsafe. And talk with survivors about having digital and hard copies of all documentation in the event the stalker hacks their device or breaks into their home. It may also be helpful for them to have multiple copies of everything located in more than one safe place. I have heard of times where stalkers have broken into someone's house and taken the record or the report that they've put together. And then a note about reporting to police. Sometimes in stalking situations, reporting to the police can potentially cause the stalker to escalate their behavior. It's important to talk with victims about this and help them set expectations for how the reporting process will go. It's very important to have a safety plan in place for reporting and what will happen if the stalker's behavior escalates and they start producing more threats. And that's pretty much all the information we have to give. So who has questions or what else do folks want to know?
I do have a question about the Title IX change. So does that mean if you're like a mandated reporter, you now have to report stalking if it's disclosed to you?
That is correct.
Haley and Sky. So we've been having quite a few RAs on our campus being stalked, and I was wondering how Title IX can possibly help in making accommodations. Like, for instance, housing and residence life doesn't necessarily want to move them because they're the RA for that hall, but also being the RA for that hall, where they live is posted in the building and other stuff like that. And so is there like any processes that you think the university has to help them with keeping their job while also keeping them safe?
So the university, to be specific, the university has no duty to help them keep their job. However, they do have that duty to allow them that equal access to education. And so there would be a strong case here that, this falls under Title IX and their access to the educational facilities is being denied. So I think especially if you have a situation that you seem to be identifying here, where you have multiple instances where RAs are being stalked, I think that is something that the university should create a policy for and ensure that they're sticking to that policy. If there are instances where there are multiple RAs, aside from moving students out of that dorm, ensuring the RA's safety in other ways, I think is a case by case scenario. But if it is a pattern now that there are multiple RAs who are being stalked, certainly that's something that the university is going to need to address, because that is their duty to ensure that educational access. I see Amanda said, what can DVSA agencies do more of to support universities, colleges in our community? One, I think, is just to ensure that you have an MOU or an MOA with your campus, and so that folks are being referred out to you if they need further support and services. I don't know, Leah, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Just building those relationships and finding out who at the university. I would say if you have, I don't know if you get a lot of people from your campus that are coming to your office, but I would find out who they're hearing from you about you from, and also like where are the incidences taking place, I guess, because that can give you insight into who on campus you need to talk to outside of like maybe the Gender-Based Violence Center or Title IX. But like if there's a location or certain area on campus where you feel like the same thing keeps happening, I would want to talk to whoever's in charge of that part of campus life. And then I would also say that, Sky and I have talked about this before, a lot of advocates at DVSA agencies don't understand the Title IX process. And of course, y'all have so much on your plate. And so that's just another thing that you have to learn. But also, students are entitled to have an advocate or some kind of person with them during the Title IX process. And it doesn't have to be an attorney. Oftentimes it may be, but it doesn't have to be. And so if someone at your program really understands Title IX, you can be that support person, especially if it's a campus that doesn't have a gender-based violence center or something like that.
And we do have webinars on our YouTube channel that talk about Title IX for advocates so that you can get a better overview of that process.
Anything else folks want to know about stalking or Title IX?
Feel free to reach out to either of us. A lot of these cases are fairly fact specific, so it's hard to give just a blank overview of what happens in every stalking case. I just had a call this morning where there is a case where who would be a respondent in a Title IX case, there was a sexual assault, and the student decided not to pursue Title IX action. Her friends talked about it, and now he is not being allowed into the fraternity he wants. So he filed a stalking claim against her because they said something online about him. So you can see how that could easily evolve into a situation where your victim becomes the respondent, and it gets really messy in Title IX very quickly. So again, it's very case by case, fact specific, but I'm happy to talk through any of those situations with you.
Awesome. Well, if there isn't anything else, we can wrap up early and hopefully folks can do something nice for themselves for the next 15 minutes. But just a friendly reminder that if you are going to register for any of NC CASA's future trainings, make sure you're, if you're a member, you're logged into Coalition Manager so that you can register for free. That's super important. But if you have any issues registering, you can always reach out to us and we'll help you with that. And yeah, this webinar was recorded, so that will be available on Coalition Manager as well. And if anyone wants the PowerPoint, I can send that out. Would that be helpful? You can say yes or no in the chat. Okay, perfect. Great. I'll email that to folks. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of your Tuesday.